Hello and welcome to Crushing Comics. I'm your host, Peter, and I'm here with Shelve, Store, or Sell. The premise is as simple as that. I have 140 short boxes where I've had comics that have been stored without me really seeing them a single time since I've moved to New Zealand from Philadelphia in 2017, and some from far before then. And so I'm going through all of those boxes and I'm trying to decide which of those comics and collected editions deserve to be shelved where I can see them and easily access them to read them, which should just stay in storage for the time being until I've got a dream library where I can shelve them all, and which need to find their way out of my collection via a sale. But here's the thing. The box that I picked today, which is box 1030, and all it says on the front is Hulk, is not a box that I know a lot about. I peeked inside of it, and honestly, no matter what Hulk comics they were, I wouldn't know a ton about them unless they were after 2012. I haven't done a lot of reading of Hulk, but this particular set of Hulk comics, I think I have read all of maybe 5 issues in this whole box. So that could make for a very boring episode, except I have some backup. In particular, a very special phone-a-friend who is going to help us for when I get stuck with Marvel material that I've bought and intended to read and have not read before. Zach, welcome to Crushing Comics. It's crazy. I have done over 24 hours of video with you in the past year, but you've never been on my channel before.
I know. This is my first appearance, and let me tell you, it is a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
I feel it's kind of like a Captain Britain situation where like the UK readers knew who he was, but then Chris Claremont had to like introduce him again to American readers.
That's right. But I have actually existed in the Crisis extended universe this entire time. I am very much in continuity. So this is just my first appearance in regular publication order.
Absolutely. So if you recognize Zach, that's because you must have been watching our HiX-Men Report that we did on the Fangirlz Assemble channel. Every week we talked all there was to talk about HoXPoX, and by the time HoXPoX was over, we had no more talks for docs. So we've been separated, as we were always separated, because Zach and I like to joke that we're like truly separated Madrox clones. At least I joke that. Do you feel it though? Our opinions are usually so uncannily similar.
It's more than mildly alarming, and it's absolutely true.
Like we can have a terrible trash opinion on a super niche thing that nobody agrees with, and the opinion we have is the exact same opinion.
A thing that nobody else has ever discussed in comics aside from the two of us.
And that happens with frequency. So the reason I brought you on is because you actually, fun fact, have read every Marvel comic from 1961 to like 2012. True? False?
This is absolutely true. It's a project that I undertook over the course of about 4 years, initially by accident. But yes, I have read through every Marvel comic.
And as it happens, I own really close to every Marvel comic from 1961 to 2012, and I haven't read nearly as many as you, mostly just
You
X-Men.
You have the library that I needed.
Right. We joke all the time that if Zach could just be at my house, this would all be much, much simpler. So what's going to happen is I have 140 of these boxes, of which I gotta say at least a third are like the complete everything Marvel. And when it comes to Marvel, if it's not X-Men, I actually really haven't read it unless it's like after Disassembled. So you're my phone-a-friend, because if I don't, this box, which is Hulk, I have not read a single issue of comics that is in this entire box.
Well, I have got you covered because I have read all the Hulk comics. So whatever's in that box, I should know something about.
Okay, so here's the thing. Normally this is shelf, store, sell, but we're probably not going to say sell because the goal is to have one of everything Marvel, so I can do your thing at some point. But you'll have to really make a case to get me to shelf them, to be like, Peter, this is an all-time classic. How have you not read it? Otherwise, probably stores is going to happen for most of them, I would imagine.
So we're going to have to see what Hulk run pops out of this box to know where it's going to go.
Well, here's where we start. Some of them are still in the wrapper. Oh boy, this is not even the first one, but I guess we're just going to go in the order that the box is. So this is Hulk Return of the Monster. This collects Incredible Hulk 34 to 39 and Startling Stories Banner 1 through 4. So we're into the year 2000 Hulk title. Hulk was one of the last titles to make the switch to a new title post Heroes Reborn, because he didn't go to Heroes Reborn. So everybody else got new titles in 1998. Hulk got a new title in 2000. And this is like 2.5 to 3 years into this title when Jones takes over writing.
That's right. So
that's as much as I know.
Hulk has an incredibly checkered, bizarre history starting around the time of Heroes Reborn. So initially, Hulk was just going to straight up be a part of Heroes Reborn. They were going to
I remember this from
they were
being
going to
around
end
at that time.
Peter David's long beloved run, and they were going to shunt the Hulk off and just give him a fresh start. But this was an early instance of fan outcry being so loud that Marvel suddenly backed out and said, okay, actually, we're going to send half of Hulk over to Heroes Reborn. We're going to send Bruce Banner into the Heroes Reborn universe.
Which is actually really clever, actually.
Right.
And they just did the same thing in Age of X-Men, where they kind of halved a couple of characters to throw us off. It's a time-honored tradition.
Except in this case, and it's one character split in two, and Peter David would get the Hulk half without Bruce Banner. And the funny thing is, when that happened, Peter David didn't actually want to do this story. By then, he had just resolved himself. It's okay, my run's going to end. I don't really have any more Hulk stories. But he didn't, after there had been such a huge outcry to keep his run going, he just figured, all right, I'll keep writing this. But then that run ended. Anyway, Marvel decided for a number of sort of media-driven reasons that they wanted to revert the Hulk back to his classic status quo. They didn't want any of the stuff David was doing anymore. David politely showed himself the door, and that was the end of that run. What followed after that were 3 successive reboots of the Hulk.
All in this title, though, right? In the 2000 title, they just tried and tried again.
Rebooting into a new Incredible Hulk title, but all initially coming from this restarted Hulk title in 1999. It started with John Byrne, as John Byrne typically does in the modern era. He lasted 6 issues and then walked.
Which I'm sure I must have that, and it feels like it should be in here, but maybe it's in the prior H box because I don't see it.
They did collect it. There is a collection. Probably have a trade of it somewhere. But that, after a little bit of fill-in, then went to a fairly long Paul Jenkins run.
Who, to me, is comic book kryptonite. I don't know. Let's see. Is this a weird opinion that we share? Great writer.
I think we're on the same page here. I think
great characters, but I will take a nap in the middle of reading a Paul Jenkins issue. No shade to Paul Jenkins, very talented individual, but I cannot stay awake through a Paul Jenkins comic book issue.
I think he's just the kind of writer who has never clicked with me.
That's so kind.
And his Hulk run, it has a lot of fans. It has a lot of fans. And I don't want to knock it too heavily, but I don't think it ever really works because he tries to unreset the Hulk from the classic status quo that they had done after David. He tries to go back to what David was doing, but he doesn't seem to really fully understand what David was doing. So he's trying to do all of the psychological stuff, but it's just not working. He never gets a clear idea of what the psychology of the Hulk is supposed to be. So that takes us into Bruce Jones's run, which is what that collection that you just hoisted up begins.
And I think this is the first one. I think
it is the first one.
Yeah. So it says Bruce Banner is a man on the run. The beleaguered scientist thought he'd finally tamed his inner beast until Hulk's latest rampage resulted in a child's death. Heavy. Is that Jenkins doing? Or does that happen here?
That's there. And
okay.
This is basically a new start. And even though it starts before the Bill Jemas era, it continues into it, and it's a very Bill Jemas kind of run.
Which means what for our readers who are not inside baseball, follow the editors-in-chief? What is a very Bill Jemas run?
So the Bill Jemas ethos at Marvel was to modernize the entire company, to move it away from the sort of classically comic booky type of books that Marvel had always put out through all of its history until about 2001, and to start doing much more widescreen, self-consciously mature Warren Ellis, Grant Morrison-esque books.
And this eventually yields
Ellis
Ultimate
and
Universe.
Morrison personally or involved with them.
Right? This does ultimately, in a year or two, beget the Ultimate Universe. Or not even, I guess the
Ultimate Universe is actually one of the first things that Jemas spearheaded.
Right.
And eventually the entire Marvel Universe starts to look a lot like it. Because that's
within 3 or 4 years, it all kind of starts looking like that. I always call it widescreen comics because to me it's that. Brian Hitch, those Brian Hitch panels that are like 2 panels per page, and they're just somebody's face, and it's just very much like a movie.
Exactly. And we go from types of comics that are sort of like loaded with dialogue and narrative captions and sort of the things that you'd expect to see in any comic between the 60s and the 90s, to comics that have like 3-word balloons on a page. Very sparse dialogue, image-driven, extremely cinematic. And that's what Bruce Jones is trying to do here. And he's trying to take the Hulk, as Jones sees it, back to his kind of horror roots of wandering the country, getting into kind of like disturbing horror psychological situations, but a very horror movie-esque type of Hulk comic.
Which can work, as we can see from the current run of Immortal Hulk, which is a pure horror movie and is one of the most acclaimed comic books in all of comics for 2 years running now.
It absolutely can work. I don't think it does.
I set you up,
I don't
and you
think
just
it does.
knocked it right out of the park.
And I'm sorry to say it, because Bruce Jones is a good writer. Bruce Jones has written comics that I absolutely love. He wrote a run on Kazar in the 80s, which has never been reprinted, and nobody ever reads it now.
It needs
but
an epic collection.
One of the best comics that came out in the 1980s.
Wow, I've never heard anybody endorse it. That I actually have it in floppies, I think. We'll find out, I guess.
Oh, I honestly think that this is like Swamp Thing, Claremont, X-Men level 80s comics. Like, it's that good.
So I have this one, Return of the Monster, and then he keeps writing another 10 issues, Boiling Point, and then he keeps writing another 10 issues, Abominable. Like, are these like, Peter, make some time to read these kind of comics? Or are these like, Peter, you'll get there eventually?
They have an ongoing plot, but these are basically structured in terms of trade paperbacks. And that, again, was very much par for the course for the era, where they would do like rigidly 6-issue arcs, and they would sell these in bookstores. So they were effectively expecting readers to be able to pick these up and just be able to read these 6 issues of Hulk essentially as a standalone story and not have to worry about anything else. So he is developing longer arcs for the character, but I don't recall it ever really amounting to much.
Now, it should be said that this particular trio are Marvel Premiere Classics, 2 of which are still in the wrap. And they're like, I think, circa 2010 through 2012, this last one is. Some of them are, I think, probably reprinted from an earlier trade collection, and I just got these because they were more complete. And, of course, there is a whole Hulk guide on Crushing Crisis that shows if you're looking for these or anything in this range to zero in. But it sounds like for these, like, great, possibly better than the 2 runs that came immediately before, but not an immediately stick on my shelf situation.
Yeah, I would say it's maybe the best or the second best run in a not particularly great period for the Hulk.
Okay, so here the next thing I have is, I don't know if this has since been collected. At the time, it was clearly only in floppies. Well, Chiron, if that's been the case. The Incredible Hulk Nightmerica, a mini-series by somebody named Laws. What do you recall about this one?
Oh,
anything?
Boy. I'm not even sure I have any specific memories of that one. It's early 2000s. We're again talking certainly during the Gemis era, but I'm not even sure if this is in continuity. It may be a continuity insert. It may just be floating off to the side, potentially in continuity.
I'll tell you, the art is amazing.
It's an extremely standalone Hulk story. It has this painted artwork that is sort of, it's not quite Alex Ross-esque, but it's clearly pointing at Alex Ross. I think it looks nice.
I think it reminds me of like Alias. It kind of looks a lot like some early issues of Alias to me.
And I think that has a lot to do with the color palette. I think it's sort of taking the same kind of deliberately muted color palette that they were using on Alias, which may have been, I'm not sure if it was Gatos who was doing the color choices on Alias. It may have been. But I think that series is more artistically notable than it is literarily notable.
It's really good looking, Zach. Like, I'm really tempted to
I love that you showed us the
ad
ad for the worst comic series that Marvel has ever put out, just by sheer coincidence.
That's just the fun of having floppies, you know?
Yeah. You never know what house ad is going to show up in there.
Do you miss,
I miss the house ads and the letter columns. I think every collection of reprinted comics should include the letter columns.
I agree, especially because now they're so sparse. It's not like, and then even if you have an old collection which somehow fits 20 issues, like some of these epic collections, we're talking about 20 pages. Like it's one signature. Like put it in the freaking book. How hard is it to do?
Right. And it gives so much context for what fans were actually saying at the time, what the writers and the editors felt about the comic that they were putting out at the time. I think you lose a lot if you're not looking at that.
Right, because I think now, like, you know, you and I are of a similar age, and we remember a lot of this 90s stuff. Even if we weren't, like, actively reading at the time, we kind of just remember it by osmosis, because you and I dropped out at different points from reading comics. And like, that's what to me informs so much of this is like, I like to know the conversation that was happening around the comic. And I don't like with this one where I'm like genuinely stumped and I'm like, I really have nothing to say. Because I think you can't ever consider a comic without considering the time and the environment into which it's being released, especially in this period of Marvel, which is directly post 9/11, which had a huge impact on the storytelling in the Marvel line because they're based in New York as an office and a publishing group. And it absolutely trickled down into almost everything.
Absolutely. There's the environment of the United States after 9/11, which has massive, massive ramifications on the kind of storytelling that Marvel was doing for at least a decade afterward. And there's also the environment of the comic industry, where this Gemis era of really deliberately modernized, trade-driven comics is happening because Marvel had really reached a low point in terms of its sales. The company had gone bankrupt, and by around 2000, it was absolutely thrashing around trying to find a way to get any audience at all.
So we're going to there's another little hit of trades here, which I think we can get through, and then we'll take a break. And clearly this is a 2-episode box, especially because we have so much to talk about. So this next one, is this the next one in sequence? Ish. So I seem to have skipped something like 6 issues there. The last one ended on 59. This one picks up on 66. There's another one in here that should be called Split Decisions. Oh, here it is. Okay. So we have Split Decisions. Now it's called The Incredible Hulk again. And we have one called...
Yeah, so they relaunch it again as The Incredible Hulk.
Dead Like Me. And now it's written... Garth Ennis wrote Hulk?
Briefly.
This is news to me. I had no idea. Tell me about Garth Ennis writing Hulk.
So this is, I mean, he's really doing it in the same mode as Bruce Jones. And there aren't a lot of issues that he works on. This is still basically the Bruce Jones era.
Okay. So in terms of thinking about the arc of Hulk, we can this is part of the same, no big change other than the name.
It's part of the same, and it's not really, I mean, at the point when we're at this latter part of the run, what they've accidentally stumbled into is a new status quo of repetition for the Hulk. That the whole point of doing all this was they wanted to escape from the old status quo, where every Hulk story is essentially Hulk runs from the military finds the Hulk fights them, Hulk laments that he can never find peace. They're done with that. They don't want to do that kind of story anymore. But now they've gotten into this new story where Hulk wanders into a small American town, something horrific happens, Hulk ends up making it more horrific and then ultimately like beats the monster or whoever was causing it or the sin inside the human soul that caused the horror to happen. And then he wanders off to repeat this sequence again. So it's
just not retainable. Like there has to be something bigger going on, at least for me. When comics drop into that, we're just writing a version of the status quo story, which for X-Men tends to be like hated and feared. At a point, you just forget who was hating them or who was fearing them in that story. And I feel like with Hulk, it's like either he bumps into the military or he goes somewhere isolated and bad stuff happens and like who can tell them apart? The stuff that sticks out for me in Hulk is like Joe Fixit, him getting married, like all that like mid Peter David stuff because it was weird and it was different. And like Planet Hulk sticks out to me because they're the different Hulk stories. And I think it's really hard to write like a same Hulk story and make it memorable at all.
Right. I think, you know, if I were to get meta about all this, I think it turns out that the strength of the Hulk is that you can pretty much do anything with him. That going back to those very first 6 issues of his immediately canceled series by Stanley and Jack Kirby.
I love that.
Every issue changes the status quo completely because they could never figure out what works. So
it wasn't because they were trying necessarily. It was that they were trying to figure out a comic that would sell to people. And they clearly failed because he became a guest character for 6 years. Yeah.
every issue completely reverses the issue right before it and finds a completely different personality for the Hulk, a completely different way his powers are going to work. And that, it turns out, is the heart of the character. He's a character who has so many different facets of his psychology that you can do anything with him, put him in any circumstance, and just see how strange you can take it.
Well, I think there's maybe two more that we'll cover in this one, and then we'll take a break. So there's one that's called Big Things. This has 70 to 76. And then there's one called Tempest Fugit, which has 77 to 82. So we're a few more years into Hulk now. This one, back to Bruce Jones after Ennis's brief interlude. And Derek Robertson, who's like, and Diodato. So this one has like some big artists. Like, it makes me almost feel like they were taking Hulk a little bit more seriously again to get artists of that caliber. Because at this point, Diodato was a pretty big name.
I think what had happened, here's the historical context for this. We're at the threshold when that comes out, where Bill Jemas is pushed out of Marvel, and we're beginning the Joe Quesada era.
Right.
So number one, they are trying to refocus on the Hulk to see if they can reignite this title. That they had felt the same thing I was saying, that it had started to get repetitious. It had started to flag at the end of Jones's run, which had started out pretty promising. And they also wanted to make it more traditionally super heroic, as the entire Marvel line was getting at that point. This is really a turn back to let's do what Marvel Comics does, which is stories about superheroes. We don't have to try to be Warren Ellis comics.
Well, and because they also at that time had a wildly successful Ultimates line that was doing that other thing. Right. I mean, because we're into like 2004 and 5 here. The Ultimates line is their top seller at this point. Because we're just on the verge of like Avengers Disassembled. There's no big hit now that Morrison's X-Men is over in the main Marvel line at this point, I don't think.
Right. We're about to reach a turning point where the Avengers franchise suddenly out of nowhere becomes the center of the Marvel universe. But that hasn't happened yet. That's just about to happen.
Imagine telling you of 20 years ago that the Avengers were going to be popular. Would you have believed that?
It's absolutely wild. It's absolutely wild that there would be any question of like, are the X-Men or the Avengers the center of the Marvel line? What, the guys in jackets, Black Knight, and
don't you dare! This might be our one time that we disagree. Don't you dare say anything bad.
We don't disagree.
No, you like it, right?
Profoundly, but you would be out of your mind if you said that it was the center of the Marvel line and not the X titles.
Yeah, the Avengers was like the weird kind of like, why would you be reading this kind of title? I don't remember I remember my days of going to the comic store like every week in the 90s, and I cannot remember a single time somebody was excited to pick up Avengers. And I was buying it at the time. And all these other heroes, Hulk, I can remember people, because that was mid-Peter David. I can remember people that were buying Hulk every single month. Of course, X-Men was like half the store. I cannot remember a single conversation that I had with a single human being about the Avengers. But anyway, this is a totally different episode. So after Bruce Jones, I'm picking up this next one, Tempest Fugit.
And there's an interesting one, because that is
Peter David comes back. What is that about?
He does come back. So this is as Quesada tries to reignite the title, and as he tries to turn it back to a more traditionally Marvel focus. What is more traditionally Marvel for the Incredible Hulk than to bring back Peter David? I wish I could say that was a good idea.
Oh no!
I wish I could say it was, because I am unapologetic in saying that David wrote the definitive Hulk run. But this is an object lesson on why creators who do legendary runs on a title really shouldn't try to do it twice, generally speaking. It's kind of a disaster. He doesn't, and I don't even know why, because it's not like he had lost his touch as a writer by then. This is right around the time
great stuff like Captain Marvel.
Yeah. He's about to do his second definitive long-term run on a title. But for whatever reason, I think he was out of things to say about the Hulk. So he just sort of meanders around in this story for what's largely it turns out to be kind of a fantasy dream sequence by the end. So there's really no point for us to have done any of this in the first place. It's one of those stories. So why did I just spend 6 issues reading this if nothing actually just happened?
Now I will say this one ends with this Hard Knocks one shot, which has Jay Lee on art. And because I'm a Wildstorm kid, I am a sucker for Jay Lee's art. And this is not that long after Inhumans. Yeah. So again, even if the stories are boring here, I mean, fantastic. This art is amazing. Do you remember?
I would compare him as an artist to Bill Sienkiewicz, and I think he holds up. But that particular one shot it's Bruce Jones allowing Jay Lee to have a showcase, because that issue is a fight between the Hulk and the Thing, and Bruce Jones's script is essentially the Hulk and the Thing fight, and it doesn't need to be more than that, because he knows that he's just there for the artist to do his thing. And so to that extent, I mean, I think it's actually, I wouldn't say put it on your shelf, but it's absolutely worth keeping around, because it's a gorgeous to look at.
Well, and that's, I think, and we'll wrap up after this and talk more in another episode, but I think Hulk versus Thing, even though neither of them are necessarily, I don't like big tank characters usually, I'm not my fave, but I think that there's so many good Hulk Thing issues because it just is visually good, and all the writer has to do is make sure that there's enough beats that the battle doesn't start to feel totally repetitive. Like, as long as there's something new and a reason for one of them to pop back up, you got the blue and the orange on Hulk, and you've got the purple and the green, or on Thing, and the purple and the green on Hulk, and it just pops off the page, and all you got to do is make sure that it doesn't feel like you're reading the same page over again, and it usually works.
So I think that's as good a note as any to take us out of this episode.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for watching this very special first ever guest star appearance on, it's going to be valuable, on Shelve, Store, or Sell. It sounds like so far we're all store on these, but there's another more than half a box to go. So Zach and I will be back next episode to talk through more early, mid-2000s Hulk. Thank you so much for watching Crushing Comics.